Go ahead, Timo. The stage is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. So my topic today is natural disturbance-based forest management, and this, I think, could be considered as one approach to ecological forestry that has been taken over the past decades or so. So I will ask questions about natural disturbance-based forest management. What is it? Why is it? And how is it? I think it's good to start with a general one sentence definition here. So we can say that natural disturbance emulation is based on the idea that by emulating the attributes of natural disturbances, it is possible to maintain or restore ecological structure and function, and thus maintain biodiversity along with other ecological goods and services. So this is from Stockdale. I think it embodies quite well the general idea that we are talking about here. But there are also other important aspects related to this approach. One of these are the evolutionary aspect. So the acknowledgement that ecosystems and forest-dwelling species are all developed through evolution in the natural forest. So it's very important to understand what the natural forest is and how it functions in terms of biodiversity maintenance, for example. The second aspect is ecological. We need a holistic approach, a holistic ecosystem-based approach to managing forests sustainably. We cannot just look at one component or one side of the system, but we need to take a holistic view on that. And third, we should not, although we talk a lot about ecology, we should not forget the social aspect. So it's important to be able to produce multiple ecosystem services and support human well-being in this approach as well. We all know that we have some problems with current forest management, and the current forest management looks like this in southern Finland, for example, and in most of Skydda. So we have the standard-wise clear-cutting system, even its compartment-wise system that we use to produce timber, but we know that there are problems. And if we compare that landscape with the natural landscape, this one from the Paanajärvi region in Russian Karelia, we can see the huge difference between these two landscapes. And it is quite obvious that when we compare these two landscapes, we get the idea that we should somehow change our management system so that we could bring some of the attributes of the natural forest to our current management system. And here, when the natural disturbance-based management can provide some answers. So the basic approach, as was already mentioned, is that in timber harvesting, we plan it to emulate the pattern and dynamics of natural disturbance regime. And it is important that in addition to timber production, the goal is to maintain natural biodiversity and ecosystem health and services. And what is important, we are not looking only at the scale of time scale of tens of years or hundreds of years, but we need to look further to maintain ecosystem adaptive capacity to confront the climate change, the global change challenges. This is a very important part of this approach. And a key component in this view is to understand how the forest functions, and especially how the disturbance-succession cycle of forest functions, because this is the kind of the fundamental cycle or the engine of the ecosystem that enables the maintenance of the health and qualities of the forest. So disturbance-succession cycles, which are quite long in the natural forest, we should be able to bring some of them into the managed forest as well, because this is so fundamental issue. And this picture tries to clarify it. We have at one time we have had a forest, a natural forest, here termed the natural range of variability forest. But because our current management system is so far away and its disturbance dynamics is so far away from the natural one, we have ended up with degraded ecosystems. And in the same way, if we want to bring back the forest closer to natural range of variability, we have to change our management system so that the management disturbance is closer to the natural disturbance in this forest. One of the problems we face, for example, in Finland, is the lack of reference, the lack of natural forest, that we could define these natural cycles. One of the things we have used here is the so-called green belt of Fennoscandia, so a chain of protection areas from the Arctic Ocean to the Baltic, where we can still find some larger forest landscapes that we can use to study the reference. And I have said that forest ecology is science-based. It should be science-based research and development. And for example, the physicists, they use particle accelerators, very expensive devices. But the forest ecologists, particle accelerators are the natural forest landscapes. They are really valuable from that point of view. Invaluable, in fact. So actually the idea of nature-based forestry is not a very young one. Actually, there's a long history of different approaches, starting from ecological forestry in North America to close to nature forestry in Europe in early 20th century and earlier. But especially since the 1990s, after the Rio conference, there was increased interest in this different kind of approaches based on natural disturbance emulation. And there's one of them was the multi-cohort model suggested by Guy Bergeron and his colleagues after 2002. And I will actually use this multi-cohort model as a kind of starting point to my own approach to come here. So this is kind of a, so the question is that how to emulate the complex natural dynamics of forest ecosystems for sustainability. So then what we have to consider is we have to understand the natural disturbance regime, and then we have to find ways to emulate the natural disturbance regime. This is the basic question, and then we should do that at the stand scale, but also at the landscape scale. So these are the main questions. How to do it? One starting point could be to try to classify the main disturbance succession cycles that we can find in the natural forest. But we have to keep it as simple as possible, but no simpler. And we have been suggesting this kind of very simple classification into three disturbance succession cycles. First, we have the even age forest following natural, following severe disturbances. That's one. Could be one. The second could be the patchy cohort structure disturbance succession cycle, and the third could be the gap dynamics even age forest driven by gap dynamics. So very simple and rough classification into these three classes. So we all know how they, more or less, how they look, at least the even age forest following disturbances. It looks something like that. Spruce dominated forest after fire. The patchy cohort age structure stand looks like this. Typically pine forest that has been hit by a surface fire, killing some of the trees, but leaving some of the trees alive, and creating a complex forest structure in the long run. And finally, the third class, old uneven age gap dynamic forest, could look like this. Okay, we have at stand scale, we have these three classes. We know that we should be able to emulate them in some way, and we have methods, silvicultural cutting methods to do that. But how about the landscape scale? What should be the proportions of the different classes, these three classes? So to shed light on this, we did a study some years ago looking at natural forest dynamics studies in Fennoscandia, and we were at that time able to locate 43 studies that were quite evenly spread across the Fennoscandia. And here we can see the main result of the study. So if you look at the smaller scale dynamics, patch dynamics, gap dynamics, so we can see that spruce forest is dominating over there. If you look at cohort dynamics, so we can see that the pine is a dominating species, and these are, in the most cases, they are these surface fire stands. And if we look at even age forest or stand replacing dynamics. So we can see that they are equally common in pine and spruce dominated forest. But the main kind of message is here that from these studies, it appears that this small scale cohort patch and gap dynamics are dominating over the even age dynamics of forest. This is kind of the take-home message. And very roughly, one fifth of the studies reported this even age dynamics, and 80% of the studies reported these more complex, to some extent continuous cover forest. And this kind of gives us a hint about the potential landscape scale distribution of these dynamics and how the emulation to these dynamics should be spread at the landscape scale. So, and the kind of the general outcome from our analysis is that old growth is a dominant feature in most studied natural landscapes. So the kind of the challenge becomes how to take this fact into account if we want to emulate natural dynamics of the forest. How to deal with the question that in natural conditions the old forest is dominating in most landscapes. This is a challenge to be met. So finally, here we can get maybe a more visual idea of how the natural disturbance could be emulated based on this multi-cohort approach. So we have here up, we have the three dynamic classes, and then down here we have the silvicultural tools that we can use to emulate those dynamics. So clear cutting with retention, we can emulate, for example, severe natural disturbances. Then we can do partial cuttings, patch cuttings to emulate the kind of cohort dynamics we can find in the natural forest. And finally, gap dynamics can be emulated by gap cuttings to bring out those. But the question is that, one of the questions is that can we really maintain some of the features of the old forest in these gap dynamic, for example, in these gap dynamic emulation stands? It's not an easy question. And in general, this is a graph from our recent paper. Kind of the purpose of this picture is to highlight that there is a certain evolution of forest management methods that can be tracked, and it's like stepping stones where the kind of the affecting factors is the continuing intensification of forest utilization, and on the other hand, increasing understanding of forest ecosystems as very complex and adaptive systems. And I think that the disturbance-based management is one step, or maybe one of the best approaches to our current major challenges of biodiversity loss and climate change challenges. And it holds a lot of promise. But at the same time, we are in a very difficult situation globally, and I think that there also needs to be some other approaches like radical conservation of large areas, which we are seeing signs of already now, but also creation of novel ecosystems, maybe which are more prone to just produce some raw material that we need. But this is very kind of dynamic picture that we can see globally. So to conclude, I would like to just quote from our paper that what we said, that natural disturbance-based management provides a comprehensive ecosystem-based framework for managing forest for human needs of commodity production and immaterial values, while maintaining forest health and in the rapidly changing global environment. So I think there is a lot of promise in this approach. Just finally, I would like to draw your attention to some of the research and development work that is going on in different parts. This is from Finland, and where we have put to around 1,000 hectare experimental areas where we are able to experiment with different forest management methods, imitating natural disturbances, and to do this at the landscape scale. So this is interesting research. I don't have time to go through, but those you can find our paper and the webpage quite easily if you want. So finally, these are some pictures from the experimental sites that we have. These are the early treatments, different kinds of treatments, gap scale, clear cutting, and patch scale cuttings in spruce dominated and pine dominated stands. And it's around 10 years since the experiment started, so we are starting to get results from these experimental sites. And this kind of experimentation is, I think, crucial for this approach to be developed into a very efficient and useful tool for us. So that's my presentation. I don't know how did I do with the time-wise, but kiitos.
Thanks a lot for an interesting presentation, Timo. There are quite a few questions for you, so and I think we are definitely within time schedule. You made a shorter presentation than in the program. So let's start with the first question here. So it's first a statement. What you have shown is that we have a inverted landscape today in Fennoscandia. So historically, we had more than 80% or up to 80% gap dynamic and other small-scale disturbance dominated areas, and just around 20% with even age stands after more severe disturbances. So the starting point is that we are missing continuity forests and older gap dynamic forests. But isn't it a problem then to apply more clear cuts or clear cut like elements on these landscapes, which is already dominated by young, even age stands and clear cuts?
I would first say that the current clear cuts are not the kind of clear cuts that we are talking in this experiment, for example, because current clear cuts have so little retention compared to what would be required for more ecosystem impacts. So that's the first. And the other point is that if we are going to modify the landscape towards the ideas that I presented, there's a long transition period is needed because the current forest structures are so different from the ones that we should be going toward. So that's one point to take into account.
We can move forward. It's a question about retention here. What do you consider to be sufficient retention in order to be called nature-based forest management?
Well, yeah, this is interesting. There's no kind of hard lines. I'm pretty, I think, but of course the big question is that if we think about the disturbance succession cycle in the natural case, so for example in the fire, most of the trees can die, and the retention level can be hundreds of cubic meters per hectare, while in a harvesting, at least normal harvesting, most of the timber is taken away. So this the early successional stage is where the difference between natural and managed forest are the greatest. So how to deal with this dilemma? So we should leave more retention on clear cut in the natural disturbance emulation. So how much to leave? There are some estimates that the minimum levels should be something like 10% of the standing stock in the forest. So that would be around 30 cubic meter minimum level. These are some of the expert opinions that have been given. Of course, it's very important also what kind of trees are left. So they should be preferably deciduous and big trees.
Yeah.
To be less, something like that, I would think would be the practical solution as much as possible.
Yeah. Another question is, can it be like this that you have overestimated the area which has been burned because humans have created a lot of ground fires, like grazed burnings, and also from slash and burn agriculture, that actually the fire dynamics was a bit different before if you will take away the human created fires?
Yeah, you are right. Probably this is the general kind of overestimation of the impact of ground fires.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is, isn't there a risk of getting double disturbances in forest ecosystem when focusing on emulating natural disturbances, as they will be added to the already existing natural disturbance regimes like storms, insect outbreak, fungi outbreaks, and so forth?
Yeah. This is a good question, and I think the management system at the larger scale should be designed so that it could incorporate natural disturbances. So they could be, so for example, if we are emulating fire disturbance in our cuttings, and then there's a natural fire, so we should kind of take that into account in our cutting cutting practices to reduce the share of occurring natural fire from our emulation of fire. So this is my answer.
Yeah,